embracing our wonderful early Cape winter. Wonderlik, ons het van hoogsomer na diep winter gegaan, binne 'n paar dae, maar ons Kaapenaars is baie dankbaar daaroor. So baie welkom by hierdie geleentheid. Ons is baie bevoorreg om so 'n fantastiese paneel hier by ons te hê. Ek is baie bevoorreg om 3 mense uit my boek hier te hê. So ek hoop ons het 'n lekker stimulerende gesprek en dat ons almal iets gaan leer vanoggend. So thank you for your presence. I'm going to tussen Afrikaans en Engels for the sake of some of our guests to be able for them to follow what we're saying, but please don't hesitate to speak Afrikaans. So thank you for your precious time. We're honored that you are with us here for our session on remarkable South African women in our history. I am Lizette, and I was privileged and honored to be the author and the researcher for this book, in which I wanted to create a pantheon of women who all contributed to the eventual birth of our so beloved country. The organizers also asked me, of course, that these books that you can see here, also from some of the panelists, are available right in front of this venue, and we'll be there and happy to sign the copies for you if you're interested. So our panelists are three remarkable South African women, are theologian, activist Christina Landman, right on the end there, political activist Pregs Govender, and environmental activist Makoma Lekalakala. Each of these 3 women, together with all the others in the book, represent so many women who could also be included. And if you ask me, who did I leave out? I'm not going to answer that question because there are so many worthy women who could be included in this book with so many follow-ups. And we all know our stories of overcoming al die heuwels in berge en bergspitse in ons lewens. So these women who contributed to the so beloved country, South Africa, we have today, with all our problems, still the best country in the world. And many of these women had to overcome and survive a brutal and discriminating male hegemonic South Africa through more than 3 centuries. And yes, even today, despite our so wonderful constitution, which is supposed to ensure equal rights to every South African, women are still experiencing institutionalized discrimination, not to mention the brutality of gender violence. So even with such a textbook example of a constitution as ours, wat oral in die wêreld weet, ons praat hulle van ons grondwet, wat so wonderlik is, 'n textbook voorbeeld van 'n grondwet. The reality so often is the opposite, namely living a life where there is a constant fear of life and limb. And of course the reality for many of where the next meal for one's children will come from. I shall introduce our speakers, Christina Landman, Pregs Govender, and Makoma Lekalakala, briefly, and then put a few questions to each in our very limited time space, and I'll check the watch, and also give you a chance to interact with the panel. First, Professor Christina Landman is a well-known, groundbreaking feminist theologian, the first Afrikaans woman to qualify as a theologian. She became the first South African woman to become a professor of theology at a South African university in 1990. Amongst her 7 degrees are 2 doctoral degrees, and she is synonymous with pioneering work regarding church reformation. In the recent debate about the role of women in one of the Afrikaans Dutch Reformed denominations, in julle wat Afrikaans is sal weet waarvan ek praat, she has once again added a voice to the debate of women's roles in the church. And just lately, she wrote a delightful column on the so-called fat pastors in the African Pentecostal tradition that was right on target. Moving to Pregs Govender, a human rights activist, author, and politician. Growing up in a political family, she was already fighting against apartheid by the age of 14. She formally joined the ANC in 1990 when it was unbanned. She co-edited our country's report to the 1995 Beijing Women's Conference, and she was instrumental in the establishment of several laws, such as the Domestic Violence Act. She was the only member of parliament who resigned as an MP to register her opposition to the arms deal. She also confronted President Thabo Mbeki's HIV/AIDS policies and his stance on antiretroviral drugs. As we all know, the environment is literally a burning issue, and we are privileged to have Makoma Lekalakala as one of the very few female environmental justice activists with us. Makoma is a director of EarthLife Africa, an anti-nuclear organization. As a campaigner for a just and fair society, her commitment to climate justice has led civil society to win the first South African climate change legal court against the government, namely the reversal of the nuclear deal between South Africa and Russia. Makoma divides her time between Johannesburg and EarthLife's satellite office in Limpopo, where pollution from power stations and coal mines has contaminated local communities to such an extent that farmers can no longer safely grow crops. So that as an introduction to our wonderful panel that we have here for the morning for an hour, and I'm going to make a round of questions to each of them, but also keep an eye on the watch, because I also want you to interact with our panelists. So starting right at the end, Christina, you started your theology studies in 1974. Although the hope that women would be ordained in Afrikaans churches was non-existent. Tell us a bit about your journey.
Lizette, thank you for calling this a journey. You know, I think that is one of the gains of this book. I don't often say nice things about pink bookies, but this pink one is rather exceptional because it acknowledges that women have a journey, and that they've chosen and made decisions to send their journey in a specific direction, although there were not always opportunities. Now, it is a decision. It is actually to become a pastor was a delicious decision I took about more than 50 years ago. I was interested in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and those days you had to do a BA admission with Greek, Hebrew, and Latin, and that I did, and coming out of top of my class, I think the men were busy looking for a pastorie-moeder rather than studying the Greek and the Latin. So that's the only reason why I excelled. And then when I went to the queer school, I was told by the professor there that women don't study there. And it was Professor Johan Heinz, the late Professor Johan Heinz.
Unbelievable.
No, he was not the baddie, he was the goodie.
He was,
I met him in front, just accidentally met him in front of theological school, and he told me, why don't you go to Eunice and study there? So I went there. It was a 6 years course, the 3 plus the 3, and it was only 26 years after that I was licensed and ordained. 26 years, I was in my 50s before I was ordained, then not in the Dutch Reformed Church, but in the Uniting Reformed Church. So I was then, while I was still busy with my studies, I was appointed at UNISA in early church because I knew now Greek and Latin, and then it was not an affirmative action appointment those days. Things like that didn't happen. And so my first congregation was in Sakelwe, in Dolstrom in Mpumalanga, Zulu, Pedi speaking congregation, and now for the past 10 years in Karlien Park in Rustenburg. It's I don't know what to say. I asked them, do you want to be called colored or brown? And they said they don't want to be called anything. So
South Africans.
that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. And the remark about the pink bookie, yes, we had a long discussion about the pink bookie because people who know me know my stance on pink bookies. I dislike them intensely, to say it nicely. And then we decided, why don't we take pink back? And the Financial Times in Britain, after all, is also printed on pink newsprint. At a time, there was a time when only men could wear pink, somewhere back in the history. So we decided on a pink bookie. Okay, then I want to move to Pregs. Tell us about your journey, Pregs, from being a teacher of English to a political activist, and how your upbringing influenced your development.
So I'm the daughter of 2 teachers, one of whom is also a writer and a playwright, who used theatre and sport to fight against the apartheid state. And so that was a big influence. It's about learning about the power of both the written and the spoken word, which has been a thread throughout my life, and the power of love that I saw as a child growing up, how people were deeply motivated by love to fight against injustice and inequality. So my parents were moved twice by the Group Areas Act, and we ended up living in somebody's garage, which was everything. And I think those were formative experiences. I think as a child, I also stammered in school, so in primary school, and I valued teachers, because I had a teacher, after having first a teacher who was a terror, said, "Speak up, child." And the more she said that, the more I stammered. And then a few years later, a teacher who was an art teacher, giving me the confidence that everybody scrambled for something colorful to write, to draw with, and there was just a piece of charcoal, and I took the charcoal and I drew a charcoal face, and then he was coming around, and I looked around at everybody's very neat, pretty colors of homes and gardens and all sorts of things, and I looked at mine, which was quite messy by then, and I thought, let me squash it and hide it away. And he came around and he asked me to take it out. And he looked at it, and I thought he was going to shout at me. And instead he took it and he decided it was going to be exhibited. So the role of teachers, of people who give you confidence in yourself and a belief in yourself in a system which is was designed, and still is, I would say, because I think although apartheid has ended, capitalism and patriarchy, which were two legs on which apartheid operated, remains strong here and across the world. And I think one of the other lessons I learned through everything was the connections between all our struggles and the importance of understanding that. So I think that remains with me. So today I continue to write. I continue to stand up against injustice, whether it's in our country, in other parts of Africa, in other parts of the world, including in what is happening today in Gaza, in Palestine, the attacks on children, school children in Iran, etc. So I think the issues and the system that I learned about was that it's a global system.
Definitely.
And it's not just in our country or in my home. Patriarchy is a global system.
No, agreed, especially with your experience being part of the Beijing Conference on Women. I think that also must have given you that global perspective.
So just a correction. I co-edited South Africa's country report to Beijing, but
Yeah, the country
chose
report.
not to go to the
Oh,
Beijing
you-
conference
yeah.
because I was busy with other things like the women's budget and
Oh.
laws in Parliament.
Oh, I see. Right. Then Makoma, the first question is briefly describe your road that led you to become an activist for the environment. Where did it all start?
Thank you very much. I think my journey or my story resonates with many other women in different communities. I grew up in Soweto, and during my formative years as a teenager, that is when the Soweto uprisings occurred. And so with me, it was that questioning every time why and what is happening. But I got answers, different answers from home, different answers from school, and the unfortunate part is that one couldn't do as much as one wanted at those years because I was a teenager. But then as I grew up, the access to electricity, so it was electrified around 1985. And then we experienced a lot of electricity cut-offs. And those electricity cut-offs was somehow something that I really questioned. But I was an activist, a youth activist, and there were so many issues that were discussed. But the real connection came in when I was invited to be to work at Earthlife Africa. That is when I was requested to come and simplify legislation, energy legislation, in particular the National Energy Act, of which Earthlife by then was trying to have ordinary community members make submissions, and so they needed to understand that. So that was where the start of my journey came, but coupled with the material conditions that I'd lived under, where one experienced electricity cut-offs, where one would join marches, would join demonstrations, and sometimes feeling like this is not going anywhere. But with that engagement, and I targeted women like myself who were not academics, who were not scientists, to say these acts have got an impact on you as a person. But that was where the journey started. And with energy, then explaining and encouraging ordinary women to be part of these engagements in Parliament. We went there, and at times would get a very rude welcome, like you have to come and speak English. You can't tell me about fat cakes, how expensive they are, because people could not connect the price of fat cakes to the price of electricity or access to electricity, so that communities and people could live, because that was entrepreneurship of women, of going out there in the morning, whether you're doing a fat cook, whether you're making soup to sell so that your family can survive. But then that also opened the climate change activism. And this is where we were making connections. And I am a popular education practitioner, so I would go out, have conversations with people, not educate people, have conversations with people because they would understand more. And I learned a lot more from ordinary women who were out there in the villages, in the townships that people ignore always. And then the struggle then went up. People were asking, some of us, like when we were challenging the Tabametsi coal-fired power plant, which is the climate change impact assessment court case that you spoke about. That was one of the things, because we said the more coal-fired power stations are built in this country, that means there's going to be more pollution, there's going to be soil pollution and food insecurity. It's a big issue, but basically the right to breathe would be taken away if we allow more coal-fired power stations to be constructed. Then the nuclear deal came, and it was like, this is not for you, this is not for ordinary people, but because we're having engagements with the Department of Energy, with the Department of Forestry, regarding that nuclear is not a low-cost energy generation option. We needed low-cost energy generation options, which is now renewable energy. And we know what renewable energy has done to the so-called load shedding that we have, which we think is manipulated. Solar, wind has actually saved us from more load shedding. And that's one thing that we stand for. So when we say environmental justice, we just don't mean just conservation. We also mean protecting the fundamental rights of people, having a balanced ecological system, and also ensuring that we save the planet for the future generations so that they can live in harmony with nature.
Thank you, Makoma. Back to Christina, and I can't help, we're both non-lovers of pink books, and here we end up with pink books, but there you can see blue is actually my favorite color. I even have blue cushions, because blue is the color of hope, and it's all about hope, and I think it's hope that kept women going. But Christina, you wrote that white Calvinism was as sexist as it was racist. Please note the past tense regarding race, I hope. But one can probably say that churches, irrespective of denomination, are still excruciatingly sexist. We don't have to name examples. But Christina, when do you think the church in general will move away from sexism and see women as equals in church affairs?
Well, as you know, there are churches that still do not ordain women. The one I won't mention, we all know who they are, but the others are, for instance, the Pope. I mean, isn't he a wonderful person who can cross bridges? But he won't ordain women, will he? No, he won't. So, on the one hand, I can
He can't.
He can't, no. Well, on the one hand, I cannot really complain that I was discriminated against. 2 years after I was ordained, I was elected to the executive of the Northern Synod and then to the executive of the General Synod. But I think it was simply because it was a bit of a messy job, you know, and they just don't want to do it anymore. So give it to the
give
women.
it to a woman.
To do. Yeah, but you know, it's okay when you say, come, let's celebrate, a woman has now been elected to this position, first woman ever. But you know, the moment that happens, there are men or even women who are bitter that they didn't get that position, and they do make your life miserable. I was once called to this congregation. I was there 6 months, and then this man came. He said he just moved into the congregation. He now will he's a pastor. He's looking for a call. He will now take over. Thank you, you can now go. So I said, but, I've been church orderly called. Why should I go, Well, he really didn't consider a woman to be called as legitimate. Once I was as a consulent in another congregation. Consulent means you go there, the congregation doesn't have a minister, you will go there and you will baptize children and you will serve the Eucharist. And then a few men stormed in there and they wanted to throw me off the pulpit. They couldn't physically do it because people were filming this on their cell phones, but they started shouting things that I must leave. But I stood there.
Yeah.
And I stayed in the congregation, and I think maybe that is what we must do and say we are legitimately here. See, we want you to be, we are here. And I remember once at a conference, my room was quite far from the conference center, so I asked this one man, a good friend of mine, please can I, hitch a ride with you? And he said, he has really been fighting for women's ordination. And then he got a nickname, the man who loves women. So then he said, please don't get in my car. Please, I can't afford it. So I said, I'm already in, let's go. Nobody's even looking at us. But yes, that is what I say. Just stand firm. That is what I want to say, is stand firm. That is what I learned. And I think in the 2010s, there were some strides made by churches to not only to ordain women, but to elect them to positions. But I'm seeing a bit of a backlash here. And I see in my own church's executive that there are only men now. They are not going forward, means they think they're going forward, but maybe they are going backward. And why is that? That is what we should ask.
A question to think long and hard about. Pregs, your next question. In 1980, there was a student boycott. And this is, 46 years ago. But you described that as one of the turning points in your life. Can you elaborate on that? Why and how did it influence your life?
So I think if I think back to 1980, a couple of decades ago, it was a time of rising food prices, rising levels of malnutrition. There was homelessness. There was a lot of huge numbers of people in detention. Children in detention.
Height of apartheid.
It was the height of apartheid. And many of us were involved not just in student politics, but in community organizing, as well as in organizing in particular sectors. For example, we had a community services unit, which also had a subcommittee on labor, and we organized in solidarity with workers. And we had a women's subcommittee which was organizing on the campus, both against the position of women workers who on the campus didn't have a place to eat. So, for example, I discovered that they were eating in the toilet, and thought we have to actually try to see how to organize and stand in solidarity. But also against sexual harassment in the hostels, etc. So it was a really interesting cross-section of issues on which people were organizing. So in communities, people were organizing against high rents, against food prices increases, etc., etc. So 1980 was a really, for me, it was pivotal in terms of teaching me about the power of unity, the power of standing against injustice together. of understanding. So it was a time where we would have intense study groups, and we learned and we analyzed not just our struggle, but struggles across the world, from Mozambique to Zimbabwe to Nicaragua to Cuba to across the world, basically. We looked at and we were learning. So we were learning at an incredible pace at the same time that we was trying to, because we were trying to understand how to dismantle this apartheid patriarchal capitalist system. And so the specific action was the unity of students on the campus. And it was very powerful because we'd moved from not having or rejecting student bodies that were basically set up by the university to actually trying to negotiate for an independent elected student body. And so the 1980 boycott hit at that time. And we organized very thoroughly. So it was organizing on the campus, students were organizing in schools, and it was organizing across the country. And there was connections between us I met somebody the other night, Jonathan de Vries, who was a student activist, and I remembered, I said to him, the first time we met was at a workshop of student activists in that period, 1970s. So that thing of how we were looking at and trying to understand and trying to develop tools of analysis, and how that was connected to how we could act and mobilize power, our individual and collective power against the system. And there was one specific thing which I suppose for me was quite an interesting moment, was when the police attacked us, and the first day they attacked us, it was like shocking just to, them sort of, particularly the way in which they attacked the women, calling the women, like it was these young white Afrikaner men standing a few minutes before that. And the next minute they were attacking us with batons and shambox and tear gas and dogs, and calling us the most atrocious names. And these were not just racist, but sexist. And the following day, they cleared the campus, and they said, we're not to come to the campus again. And we went back to the campus. And this time when they attacked us, we ran towards, it was a spontaneous moment, we ran towards a place where there was construction happening. And we were all like so terrified of them hitting us or shooting us or, whatever, tear gassing, that I'm not sure how it happened, but somebody picked up one of these pieces of wood or metal, and we all did the same. And we were a few. At that point, it was just a few of us. And we turned around and ran towards those who were the soldiers and the police that were attacking us. And they turned with their dogs and they fled. And the sight of that was a turning point for me, because it was that, yes, we have fear. We have enormous fear, and we have we should be afraid. When we take on injustice, we should be afraid. But if we also have those moments where we can connect to each other and see how much of power we have together, and I'm not necessarily advocating that we take up some things ahead, but I think that to protect ourselves and each other, to protect those who, I saw a woman who was pregnant, and the way in which the police went for her the day before. And they specifically were going for people, for women particularly, who couldn't run. I could run really fast, and I ran up the hill, but I turned around and I saw the way in which they were hitting people. And I think that right to protect ourselves, the right to stand up against injustice, is a right that still applies today.
Thank you, Pregs. And it's also that courage that lies in communities. If we stand together to find courage and find hope.
I think so. I think that if you looked at what was happening, where people were standing together and standing up against rising food costs, and workers were standing up against very low wages, what we would call peanuts, and working really long hours under terrible conditions. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Makoma, you call yourself a social, economic, environmental activist, because in your words, one actually cannot divorce one from the other. Expand on that.
Thank you. This is the question I'm asked every time. It's an intersectionality of the issues. You cannot talk climate change, which is the biggest threat on life on Earth, and not talk about food insecurity, water scarcity, pollution from fossil fuels, biodiversity destruction. So that's why I call myself a social, economic, and environmental justice activist. One of the things is that people talk more about that there's no food, there's no water. But what really causes us not to have food, what really causes us not to have water, is the threat that are coming up, or the impacts of climate change. In South Africa, people today would think that climate change is still far away from us, but it's here with us, particularly that there are people who are unable to till their land. There are people who don't have access to water, who don't have access to food. The rain bombs that took place around the eastern coast had taught us a lesson that we need to be prepared. And that us needing to be prepared, we also need to bring up mechanisms of adaptation. But let me tell you, ordinary people, particularly those in rural areas, have mastered or have come up with how to adapt. And they take this from ancient wisdoms, from the stories that were told by the elders. And these stories, they make it practical and say, oh, this is how we adapt when we don't have water. This is how we adapt when we don't have food. Food preservation, which is documented as something that South African women, either from those who were the voortrekkers moving from one place to the other, and the women who were in different villages, they taught each other on how to preserve food. And today we've got a biltong that is loved all over the world. That is part of, when you eat a biltong, remember, it's part of us securing food, it's food security, and this also has made people to economically, have money. So economically, why I call myself an economic justice activist, it's around access to livelihoods. A lot of people don't have access to livelihoods. They don't get supported, and that's why we have the income grant support, which is a campaign that started long ago. That's what the Honorable Pregs Govender was talking about, to say around the 80s, mobilization was around all these things because people needed to live, and we need to live now. So the economy cannot be in the hands of a few, whilst the majority do not have, because what is important is our livelihoods, and not really for people to get rich. Equality is important, and when we talk equality, we don't just talk equality because the Constitution guarantees that. It's more than that. So as an environmental justice activist, I must say that part of what I do is challenging environmental corruption. There's a lot of environmental corruption in this country. You find projects that are damaging the environment being authorized while we still have laws that protect that. We've got laws that protect endangered species in this country, like your baobab trees, all your proti trees, but you find that in the areas where those national treasures are concentrated, you find that is where projects that are going to damage that are being authorized. So that's part of what we do. But when we say environmental justice activist, that is an intersectional word that means that we need to live in harmony with nature. And you cannot tackle environmental justice without tackling social issues. We're also tackling economic issues.
Thank you. Great answer. And it's a good reason to eat biltong, hey? Back to Christina. The two of us were lovers of pink bookies. Non-lovers of pink bookies, except for this one pink book. Christina Landman wrote a book because of the pink bookies being those dagstukkies. If you can still find it somewhere, please do yourself the favor. Christina, your advice to female churchgoers across all creeds and colors to ensure their rightful and equal place in their denomination, what would that be?
Listening to these women, I think they have a deeper idea about equality and reaching it than I do, but I can try something superficial. You know, women usually, when they fight for equality, they do one of three things. They say, let's become more like men, you know, more rational, more, like that, and then the men would accept us as equals. Others would say, let's become more feminine. Let's become more obedient and more koekierig and so on. And then the men would say, no, there's space for you there. And the third group would say, no, let's really say these are our rights and we are going to fight for them. So what I would like to say is that I think we should guard against two things. The one is to say that all women are the same. And all women's aspirations are for leadership. And you know, when I was, I think I was like in my late 20s, when I for the first time heard a woman speak in public, because as white girls, we didn't hear the black women's voices, and the white women, I think, except for Rina Venter, who somewhere later became a minister. She was the first white woman I ever heard speaking in public. We had no role models. So if you ask us how must we become equal, we must ask them because they are our role models. We didn't have any role models. Another thing I think we shouldn't do is ascribe everything to sexism. You know, there are women who do now have the gift of the gap, you know. We have provided them with gaps, and they are in positions where they shouldn't be. I know. I listened to the previous conversation, and I know I was working at a prison on behalf of the inspecting judge of then it was called prisons. And they appointed an affirmative action woman there at this one prison, and because she didn't know the B orders, she wouldn't allow anything, not even the congregations bringing a Christmas lunch or something like that, you know. So we must guard against that, and that would be our integrity, and that would be why we could say we have an integral right on equality. You know, we did interviews with 60 women in the congregation, asked them what positions in church they wanted, and they didn't want. They wanted to come and sing and listen and dance in the church. They didn't want leadership positions in the church. But those who have the talents, and I hope that I was never elected to a position because of gendered skills, never, but because I had real skills in that specific area. And that would bring integrity, and that would be and that would be the grounds for asking for equality. And not even equality, even superiority, if you ask me. But anyway, there you are.
Good, thank you. Pregs, over to you again. You played a key role in convincing 100,000 racially divided workers to join the non-racial COSATU of the time. what do you think we need today to form a 21st century, not, I don't want to say COSATU type organization, but maybe I should rather say a new United Democratic UDM type movement to realize all the potential our country has to offer, especially to women? Loaded question.
Just a simple question. I think to answer that question, I have to look at what are the lessons from that moment in time of women workers organizing in across the country. So it was actually I'd been elected as National Education Officer to the Garment and Allied Workers Union at its founding congress. And there'd been a lot of work that had been done, but you had essentially it was two, what we'd call sweetheart unions coming together. And for the first time it was a leadership that was elected into power which was largely committed to creating a powerful, transforming the union into a real voice and a home and a voice of working class workers in the clothing and textile and leather sectors. And the thing of it was that although it was a majority women's union, women would often elect men into positions of power.
Yeah.
And so I remember the first workshop I'd convened with key women in the union. And I said to them, well, you know, when you think of the word women, what comes to mind? And I just wrote on a chart. And it was all the stereotypes. Women can't unite, women gossip about each other, etc., etc., etc. So I wrote it all down, and then I said, okay, so we're going to end the workshop now, and we all go home. And they said, why? And I said, well, if we believe this about women, then this is what we believe about ourselves. And we've got to look at where these messages came from. And we've got to understand all the internalized voices in our heads that prevent us from valuing ourselves. Our Constitution talks about inherent dignity and substantive dignity. So it's both a birthright and it's linked to the right to water, to health, to education, to housing, to employment, etc., etc. So it's a whole range, to land. It's a range of, that's what substantive dignity is. It's value that is inherent, that we're born with. Nobody gives it to us. But it can be crushed, it can be smashed on, it can be trampled on. And so part of it was to actually begin to build unity. And you had to build it in a principled way. What is the basis of that unity? What's the basis of... So we had democratic elections in the union, and many unions did not have democratic elections. I remember one of the first workshops, shop steward stood up and he said towards the end of the workshop, I want to make a confession. I'm from one of those factories where we had no elections. The bosses chose us. So I came here, having been mandated by my boss, to come and see what's going on here and what she was talking about, and to report back to him. And he said, I'm really angry with myself. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell the workers what I'd been asked to do. And I'm going to share with the workers what I've learned about democracy and how we elect our leaders. And that each of us is both a leader. Each of us has the potential to lead. And so he went back and he had a meeting. The workers elected him as their shop steward, as one of the shop stewards in that factory. So we ended up, I remember we had a very systematic way of mapping democratic elections in every factory, factory by factory. So you had a systematic process of representatives who represented their factories, who represented their regions, So and then represented the national. I remember our first founding president was somebody from one of the old unions, and I remember Mr. McDoom the first time saying to me, "I don't know what this gender women thing is about, and women's rights and women's equality is all about, and I don't know, you must stop talking about all of this. We're just a union." And at the end of it, when he was the final Congress, he said, the person who must be elected into this position must be a woman. So the issue of how workers, men and women, began to start questioning and engaging and looking at what does it mean. Cuba as a household code that they instituted after their revolution. And the idea was that men and women would be encouraged to share work against the machismo of the culture that had been there. And of course, it didn't change it, because that change is really about each person looking in the mirror of themselves and their own hearts and their own minds. But it's also understanding how do you create moments of. So one of the things that I would do in the workshops was create time for people to actually sit with themselves. And that's like just creating space, creating a pause. And somebody said to me recently, a worker leader who's now a major, she did a major speech yesterday, but she was with me in the unions, and she said to me, you never called it meditation, but that's what you were teaching us. And so one of the things that influenced me as a child was that I was a lifelong practitioner of yoga, which is simply a thing of connecting to yourself. It's about using your breath and using your body to connect to yourself and to that birthright in yourself and in everyone else. And I think when people have that opportunity to do that, they release their own power. So it's not about an educator. It's about creating the space and perhaps the information that is necessary, the facts that are necessary, but it's trusting and respecting the dignity of the people you are working with. And that is what was key to that education program. At the end of that process, because the people were divided, because they were scared of COSATU, because it was a non-racial union. And colored workers in the Cape and Indian workers in Natal, mostly women, were taught to be afraid. And apartheid worked by dividing people, by using tribalism, ethnicities, by creating division and exploiting division. And that's how the global system works. It actually divides and it rules and it conquers. That's why we have a global arms industry. That South Africa's arms deal wasn't about South Africa. It was about a global arms industry. And we must understand that. And we must also understand how corruption is built into trade deals, including the arms deal. So the issue of the workers making the shift, and I think in terms of the Women's Coalition as well, is that it's firstly working with the people who are most oppressed, most exploited by the system, and creating spaces so people can reclaim their own leadership, their own power, their own agency, and unite and act. And then they see, well, actually there's nothing to be afraid of. We're all in the same boat here. And we don't have to fear each other. We have to actually challenge, we have to unite with each other and challenge the system that is oppressing and exploiting us and enabling very few people. So the head of the union when I entered in the Western Cape, for example, had been I think he owned racehorses or something. So he wasn't elected by workers. He was a man in the Western Cape Union who headed the union, and not elected. Looked more like the bosses than the workers. So the thing of and they would have things. So they put a lot of money into the Spring Queen competition, and they would the bosses would put money into that, and they'd put money into getting a woman a fancy gown for the night, and yet they would pay them peanuts and would refuse and expect them to work incredible long hours and under poor health and safety conditions. So those things are really important, and that is if we're going to change something, and if we want to have unity, we've got to say, and I think I want to agree with you, it's look at the people who are doing it in the areas that, I think there are organizations of farm workers, women farm workers, there are organizations of women on climate justice, against mining affected communities, etc. And that's where you build unity. And the United Democratic Front was really a broad church, but its heart was actually not just the people who you saw as the leaders at the top. Its heart was those organizations that were really working at a grassroots level across the country. And that's where you build. The Women's National Coalition, really the key thing there was what happens on the ground in areas which the newspapers didn't go to, the media didn't go to, like the border region, for example. Nobody went there, and in terms from the media to cover that. So how you build coalitions on making sure that you're looking at the issues of water, the issues of land, etc. Those were contentious issues to unite on in the Women's National Coalition. Who owned water versus who was polluting the water, who laid claim to the water, etc. So those are, it's important, and it also requires incredible courage to be really honest with ourselves and each other as we do that.
Thank you. And I think we should elect you as the leader of a new kind of democratic movement. A question, last question to Makoma. We write on 10 o'clock, but we started late, so let's give us a couple of more minutes. Your opinion on the current energy crisis that is the result of the US and Israel war in Iran, and how do you think it will affect us in the global south?
Normally, I don't like responding to global politics, but I'll attempt because I feel that much of the work has got to be done on the ground, but that is connected. We have been impacted already. When the war around Ukraine and Russia started, that's when we felt the pinch. But the pinch has been there for quite a long time. For the mere fact that petrol prices keep on rising, it's not because we don't have petrol, it's because of the prices that have been set up there globally. And for now, when that man went into Iran, we know what, some of us were like, I was shivering, to tell the truth. Real shivering, as if I've been put in a very cold fridge. It's because there's nuclear weapons in that country. And anything happens, or there's a bomb, same as the Ukraine issue, we will be affected, all of us. Radiation cannot be controlled. And we know what has happened with Chernobyl in Ukraine. Even now, you know, the soil around that, you find people in neighboring countries still giving birth to deformed babies. We don't know how much has got, the impact is because it's always hidden. And I think we've seen the prices now being high of petrol. But what is much more worrying is the South African situation. When the South African situation where we are being bullied to accept energy generation that is not a reality for South Africans. We know that coal actually is a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions globally. and South Africa has got to move. And South Africa is one of those countries that has adopted the just transition as per the Paris Agreement, because we are signatories of the Paris Agreement. And I'm glad to say I've been one of the inaugural climate commissioners that were appointed by the president, and we produced what you call a just transition framework. And that framework says we need to move away from fossil fuels. And it doesn't say overnight, it says we need to move. And when we developed the nationally determined contributions last year, it was in the line of that, though highly contested. So in a way, what the energy situation in the country is, it's actually not benefiting South Africans at all. We know of the Eskom dramas, and Eskom now it's trying again to start with a new nuclear build, 5,200 megawatts of new nuclear build, whilst they know that this is not a low-cost energy generation option. So meaning that foreign companies are going to build, own, operate, and transfer all that damage to South Africans. So we are in a serious problem, and the problem didn't start like yesterday. It has been there with Eskom mismanagement, because there has not been any transparency, and it continued. Today we have load shedding, and not because there's no energy security in the country, it's because of the interest of the financial institutions that has given our government billions and billions of money, because they're going to score from that from the cost overruns. So I would say if we had moved away from generating electricity from coal, decommission Quebec nuclear plant, invest much more in renewable energy, and practice energy efficiency on a daily basis, we would not find ourselves in the situation that we find ourselves in. And that situation has been taken advantage by the geopolitics, by those globally who want to benefit from South Africa through manipulating the energy choices that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Makoma. I know we're a couple of minutes over, and I'm sure there is a question or two, but seeing that we started late, in one word or one sentence, I want responses from Christina, Pregs, and Makoma. In one sentence, one word, what would your advice be to a teenage girl today to realize her dreams and ideals?
Mine may seem irrelevant, but that is what I'm dealing with in my context. I would tell them, don't get pregnant to feel important.
Okay. Breaks.
I'd say make time on your own to enjoy yourself, your body, your mind, your heart, your spirit. Take a moment and learn about yourself and enjoy yourself, without even, and so that when you're actually interacting with others, you're interacting from the fullness of yourself.
Okay. Makoma?
You have a fundamental right to be yourself. Let your conscience lead your actions.
Thank you. Well, thank you to our panel. Thank you for the wonderful insights you gave us. I see Tieu is already here, so I'm not sure if that's an urge to... Oh, that's for a question. Do we have a couple of minutes? Are there any questions?
Is it possible to put those lights up at the back? Because we can't really see people with that light.
Is there a question? Has our panel blasted you for the Sunday morning? Right?
No. I don't have to go first, but it's just that you're all such wonderful, wonderful women. And I just feel like our younger generation is so focused on themselves, and it's so overwhelming what's happening globally that we can't isolate ourselves in South Africa anymore. How on bloody earth do we start this again? How do we start what you did and what you did and what you did with the young ones again?
Especially in the light of being addicted to that little device in their hands. Any one of you want to respond to that?
Can I suggest that we
Great.
take a round of questions?
Okay, okay. Another one? Is there another one?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Kan ek Afrikaans praat? Professor, ek is ook 'n predikant in die VGK van die minder vroue. En ek moet net sê ons sukkel nou nog. Ek wonder net oor die gaping of die gaps wat u nou van gepraat het, wat julle dalk vir ons mag gelaat het of nagelaat het. Ek sukkel bietjie om my gap te vul. Want dieselfde uitdagings waarmee u gesukkel het, sukkel ons as vroue predikante nog vandag, waar ons die kansel half deny word. So self met gemeentelede. So ek het gewonder, is dit miskien 'n kwessie van institutional, a lack of institutional memory, or because ek het 'n boekie geskrywe waarin u praat van die pink boekie en hoe dat ons as vroue lig in 'n donker wêreld moet bring en geregtigheid moet bring waar daar ongeregtigheid is. Maar dis moeilik.
Goed. Is dit ons vraag, Theo? Nog derde vraag?
Okay, just, I think the important thing is that one must call out injustice wherever it happens. And when you look at that, there also has to be a balance. We spoke about the issues in the churches, Christian churches. We've never had a women pope. I think if you go look at other religions, I don't know if I've ever come across a woman imam, for example. You know, so those are issues when we look at the girl child. The fact that in the different religions, women's rights are denied. Then earlier in your in your talk, Pregs mentioned the fact that what's happening in Palestine, and we looked at what happened with the children in Iran. At the same time, we've had Yazidi women being raped and murdered. We've looked at how under Sharia in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran and so on, you know, how women are treated. So I just think one needs to have balance, and you know, that never comes across because people look at the one side, and injustice is injustice. We must look at that, you know. So, and I think the final point is when you dismantle one structure, what you replace that with also is an issue, you know, and you cannot just dismantle things when you do not have an answer as to what would be
Yeah, it's not only race apartheid, but also gender apartheid. Okay, those three questions. The first question, who would like to respond?
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Young people have got a tool, a very powerful tool that they use every day. And I have heard some of them saying, let's use TikTok to be able to bring forth awareness, to educate our peers. And I've seen some of the clips that have been made by young people, because most of them are no longer like us. They don't enjoy reading that book, you know, holding a book in your hand and reading that. Some of them want fast stuff, you know, something that is not going to take their time for doing any other thing. But I've seen that tool being used powerfully. And I think we also have an obligation as elders, or as mothers, as aunts, as sisters, that we need to mentor these young people. that is something that we think it's a lot of work, and it's not. Just sitting down, having a conversation that may assist in sparking interest and that person being active. So I've seen that happening. Part of my work, it's connecting the ancient wisdoms with what's happening practically. And I'm glad that you go to a lot of villages, you still see that happening, that you find elderly women sitting down with young women in a cycle, some also still practicing initiation. People have got different perspective and misinterpretation of how some of these things are taking place. But at the end of the day, you find that those young women grow up to be something because they learned from the elders. And that's where the power comes from. In the book, if you go through some of the names, it's the names of those that would have been assumed on being overlooked as some sort of traditional practitioners, traditional leaders. There's also some of the history that we normally share with young people of the African women leaders that are not known. It's very rare that today people speak about Mantatisi, about Nzinga, about Mujaji. Coincidentally, I'm wearing the power attire of the Mujaji clan today. And that shared with young people, with young women, inspires them, because it's not about fighting for leadership. That is about doing something that is going to change your community, something that is going to build your community, something that's going to last forever, and not only make you to be that powerful person. So mentoring is quite important. And people take mentoring. I see now people are making that a business. But I must say that it happens a lot in townships, in informal settlements, in villages, where women share their knowledge, share their skills with young women, but they have a tool, and we must encourage them to use this tool, to use the apps, because they have also assisted in building the kind of leadership and the kind of determination, courage, that we may be missing. There's so many things that are happening that we don't all know of them, but we'll only realize after a long time that this has happened because of Pregs sitting down with a young woman, just sharing her story, just talking and asking that person questions. And that is what I think we all have an obligation, and we have to spend that 10, 15 minutes and do that, whether on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Tweede vraag.
Ek wil net graag die dominee
Christina.
daar antwoord, en baie dankie dat jy dit gesê het, want dis regtig 'n wake-up call, jy weet. Ons dink alles is maar okay. Daar was nou in ons kerk se geskiedenis 2 keer op verskillende tye vroue in executive. Daar was laas geen vroue in executive nie, en daar gaan hierdie jaar ook geen vroue wees nie. En ons weet nie wat is die vroue dominee se probleem nie. Die ander dag was ek in 'n SIP in 'n regional synod waar die vroue wat teologie studeer moet nog hulle man se skriftelike toestemming hê.
Wat?
En ek moet toe 'n lesing oor die kerkorde gee, en ek sal jy weet, daar's so een ding, 'n vroue dominee kan 5 maande maternity leave kry, maar ek wil dit 'n bietjie toets, en ek sê, wat nou as die vroue dominee nie getroud is nie? En die een, hulle kyk my geskok, en hy sê, ek wil nou regtig hê die vroue moet dit antwoord. En die een vrou student sê, you know, the moment that a congregation calls a woman dominee who is not married, they should immediately start with daily prayers that she should get a husband so that she will not get pregnant while she's unmarried. And the other one said, you know, it's a woman's right to have a baby. So if this woman pastor who's not married has a baby, but through kunsmatige inseminatie, that'll be okay. But if it's a natural way, she must be disciplined. So that's what we think of ourselves. And you know, one woman, he told me the other day, she was standing in front of this congregation, and her hair was sort of falling in her face, and she was just moving it like this. And afterwards, there was a complaint against her at the church council. Die dominee speel met haar hare op die preekstoel. En dit is die goed waarmee ons nou sit. Dankie vir daai wake-up call.
Okay, Pregs, maybe if you just want to give a response to the last question.
Sure. I think, yes, all religions are patriarchal.
Yeah.
What we have today is even more dangerous, because what we have today is the rise of religious fundamentalism. So we have it, so you know, the Israel's genocide, for example, was quoting text to justify. So it was quoting text to kill children, babies, anyone. So that was the text. It was religious text. In India, Modi and the BJP use Hinduism and Hindu mythologies to reinforce division, to encourage people to attack other people who are maybe of a different caste, who may be of a different religion, and who also use it to protect the interests of big mining companies from destroying forests and attacking indigenous people and their rights. So, and then you have in every religion, and the examples you've given as well, you have, whether it's the religion that people, which actually was proclaimed by Buddha that there shouldn't be a religion, but there is Buddhism. So even the Buddhists in Sri Lanka are behind the attacks, so again on the Tamils. The the issue of in Afghanistan, the Taliban, etc. So it's, and Al Qaeda. So it's all of these things which are particular brands, but one must always go back to look at who's sponsoring religious fundamentalism, who's sponsoring the religious right, whether it's in Africa, in Asia, in Americas, who's sponsoring the rise of the religious right across all religions, and what's their agenda, and how are they connected to the global arms industry? Because each war makes billions. I mean, the rise in global arms spending has been phenomenal over the last 2 years. And the thing about nuclear power, you've got Trump, who's got nuclear power, who's at his fingertip. You've got Israel with nuclear power at their, and we know this, we all know this. And so the issue of nuclear power, the biggest nuclear powers in the world, how do you hold them accountable? How do you actually hold them accountable? And what is their role in fomenting war and division across the world?
Thank you. Thank you to our panel. Thank you for the wisdom shared on this Sunday morning. I think it was a Sunday morning well spent. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights with us. Thank you, and thank you to Theo.